Hello and welcome to Smaulgld. In case you missed it, top gold, silver, crypto, and news stories for the week ended May 6, 2018. Warren Buffett, Bitcoin is rat poison squared. And Buffett's sidekick Munger gets in on the act and calls Bitcoin a turd and gold investors jerks. A little later on in the program, we're going to be talking about why Buffett and Munger are very much opposed to Bitcoin and gold. Other stories. Goldman Sachs to launch crypto-related products. They're not going to trade Bitcoin yet, but they are going to open up a derivatives trading desk. NASDAQ itself is mulling crypto trading. The special prosecutor, Mueller, had questions that he supposedly wishes to ask Donald Trump should Donald Trump grant an interview. We're going to take a look at that. And a judge rebukes the Mueller team on the Manafort prosecution and requests from the Mueller team documentation for the scope of their authority. Meanwhile, the GOP has threatened to impeach both the Deputy Attorney General and Attorney General of the United States, Rosenstein and Sessions, for failure to turn over documents. And the Prime Minister of China says that Marxism is, quote, still totally correct for China. Kazakhstan's gold reserves draw even with the United Kingdom. They're both now at 310 tons. Let's take a look first at the prices of gold and silver. But before we do that, just to let you know, Smaulgld's Moronica for the week is up now on BitChute. It's up there exclusively. So head on over there if you want to check out the week's Moronica. Gold and silver had an uneventful week, although for the first time in a long time, silver actually outperformed gold with a positive 4-cent gain on the week, and gold actually fell $17, making the gold-silver ratio itself fall below 80-1, and the gold-silver ratio ended the week at 79.70. For that ratio really to turn around, you don't want gold to drop and silver to rise 4 cents every week. What I think needs to happen for that ratio to drop is that gold needs to catch a solid bull run, and silver has to have an even more solid bull run. I don't think you want to get a lower gold-silver ratio just on the basis of silver inching along and gold going down, although that could happen. Now, let's take a look at the stories. Dollar collapse. One of the things we've been talking about on the Smaulgld channel for quite a few years is who will buy U.S. Treasuries if foreigners stop buying them. Foreigners hold a substantial amount of U.S. Treasuries. That's basically a recent phenomenon over the last 25, 30 years. They've increased, especially Japan and China. Now, China has well over a trillion U.S. Treasuries, as does Japan, but Japan has been cutting back on its U.S. Treasury holdings, mostly because the Bank of Japan has been busy printing yen and buying their own sovereign debt instruments. China is still a large holder and major purchaser of treasuries, although they have cut back in recent years, and it remains to be seen what happens as a result of all of this tariff discussions that are currently going on between the United States and China. However, the St. Louis Fed notes on the Fred blog, as foreign investors buy fewer treasuries, domestic investors pick up the slack. One of the things I noted a while back is some of those domestic investors are indeed companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. Apple itself owns, I think, between Apple and Google, they own more than a few countries that actually own. So you can count on corporate America also to buy these treasuries. Now, as to the dollar's strength itself, well, here Lisa Abramowitz, a Bloomberg reporter, notes the dollar just reached its highest level versus its peers in 3 months. And despite the fact that we've had the petro yuan, which has had no impact yet on the dollar, and I don't expect it to, unless we see a big uptake in the petro yuan, and we see longer trading hours, and we see capital controls being lifted in China. We see China get its debt issues under control. None of that is on the horizon, but that doesn't stop some from saying the petro yuan will undermine America's dominant role. This is the end of dollar hegemony, beginning of the multipolar world. Basically an alternative financial media narrative that has been around for years, dollar collapse and so on. Now remember, this forgets the fact that if the petrodollar is supposedly gaining its backing because Saudi Arabia prices its oil in dollars and will only accept dollars, and if somehow they change and they switch to yuan, that somehow that's going to end dollar hegemony. Remember, the United States sells oil to China too, and the United States is now the largest oil producer in the world and also becoming the largest oil exporter, which would mean if somehow you think that oil is the key to why the dollar reigns supreme in terms of foreign central banks holding it, well, if you believe that, which I don't think is the main reason central banks hold dollars, but if you believe they need to hold dollars to buy oil, well, if the United States surpasses Saudi Arabia as an oil producer and exporter, well, there's your underpinning right there. Indeed, the United States sells plenty of oil to China and natural gas. So it could be the petro gas. So the dollar index now is higher and has been basically higher than any time since the Fed started QE. Now, it had really ratcheted it up at the beginning of 2017. It has kicked back a bit. But remember, the Bank of Japan, Bank of England, European Central Bank, and others have all taken their interest rates down to zero, Swiss National Bank, and are doing QE. The U.S. is actually, the United States Fed has raised interest rates, I think 5 times, and is not doing QE, and has actually started to shrink its balance sheet. Now here's this guy, Jack Posobiec. He's not really a person who follows the dollar or the economy, but he says one of the most overlooked stories from the Trump era is that the U.S. is moving beyond energy independence to energy dominance. Now, he's not talking about the petrodollar there, but he is noting something that I've been noticing since 2014, that as the U.S. gains, or U.S. oil production increases and becomes dominant, that reduces the United States' need for imports on oil, which they still import. U.S. still imports a lot of oil, but also reduces its need to rely on Saudi Arabia to give it some underpinning to the dollar. Now, despite slowing U.S. growth, dollar on track for the best week since 2016, and again, despite the launch of the petro yuan, which is a big, big story to end dollar hegemony. Dollars rallied versus the gold. Remember the gold-backed petro yuan? Then it changed to gold exchangeable on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. No, then it changed to oil producers will get yuan, and then they'll go and buy gold with it, creating massive gold demand. Nope, none of that has happened. None of that ever was going to happen. The only thing that was ever going to happen was a part-time yuan-denominated oil futures contract that was never going to challenge dollar hegemony. But here you go. Bank of International Settlements, a record 22% surge in international debt security issuance pushed up the annual growth in U.S. dollar credit to 10% in 2017, 83.7 trillion. This is another reason why there's dollar, quote, hegemony, not because countries need dollars just to buy oil. If they do, they can need those dollars to buy oil from the U.S., but because a lot of emerging markets, including China, if you want to call it an emerging market, use dollars in their financing, and those dollars are going to have to be paid back at some point, and it creates dollar demand. It's virtuous or unvirtuous cycle, but that's the case. The world runs mostly on dollars. Now, besides foreigners buying U.S. debt, many emerging markets, including China, also issue their own dollar-denominated debt, creating demand for dollars. Now, the state-owned enterprises in China issue dollar-denominated debt, and even the sovereign country of China recently issued a dollar-denominated bond of about $3.5 billion. There's the dollar index hegemoning higher during the past few weeks. Game-changing petro yuan so far. No game change at all as the dollar index hegemons higher. Steel tariffs. Trump postpones steel tariff decision for EU, other U.S. allies. China and the United States still talking. You're talking around the margins, though. We're not talking hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars yet. We'll see where it comes, although China took another swipe and says they stop buying soybeans from the U.S. altogether. That could only mean for the U.S. The farmers either get hurt or they lower prices, but it's probably good for the U.S. consumer. And it probably raises the cost of Chinese food, because where else are they going to get the zillions of tons that the U.S. exports to them? All right, let's see. China offers to increase U.S. imports, cut tariffs on some products. So we'll see what happens. This is in flux here. I think eventually you'll get to some better balance of trade than we currently have. Share buybacks. Apple will buy back $100 billion worth of shares, and Buffett is going to buy some of those shares as well. As I mentioned, Apple, Google, U.S. Treasury holdings soared in 2017, and their holdings topped the holdings of Canada, France, and Germany combined. So that's who's picking up the slack. Now, these Mueller questions for Trump, I looked at them. First of all, I don't even know if they're real. If they are real, they're amateur questions, because this whole thing is really starting to be exposed as not having any real basis or legitimacy. And let me explain why. If you have a special counsel appointed, he's supposed to, or she's supposed to, go and look for evidence of a specific crime. Well, the first, the appointment of the special counsel never specified that Mueller is supposed to look for any particular crime. He's supposed to look into Russian interference in the election, but there was no specific crime alleged. Now, how did Mueller get appointed? Well, Rod Rosenstein appointed him. Now, here's where you get into trouble. Rod Rosenstein appointed him. A, did not give him a specific mandate or a specific crime that he was supposed to look at. And the reason that he appointed him was supposedly because James Comey had had meetings with Trump, and the contents of those meetings, or the subject matter of those meetings, were leaked in a memo and leaked to a law professor who was on the payroll at the FBI and a friend of James Comey, specifically for the purpose of getting them to the media so that there would be a special counsel. So you have a former FBI director intentionally advocating for a special counsel, basically because he was fired, because he thought there was some obstruction of justice in his firing. Unpack that. First of all, the president can fire whoever they want, and he doesn't have to explain why he fired anyone. And those are part of the Mueller questions. What were you thinking? Why did you do it? None of their business. But putting that aside now, the special counsel has been appointed by Rod Rosenstein because of supposedly what's in the memos that Comey potentially illegally leaked. Now, Rosenstein, the reason that Comey had to write those memos was Rosenstein himself wrote a memo recommending that Comey be fired. And the reason he said he should be fired was because Comey had mishandled the Clinton investigation, that there could never, ever be a restoration of confidence in the FBI unless that guy was gone. So then Rosenstein, after recommending Comey gets fired, Comey gets fired, leaks a memo complaining, and then Rosenstein says, yeah, okay, let's get a special counsel. How about Mueller? Meanwhile, Sessions, who is the Attorney General, has recused himself from the investigation, or the Russian part of the investigation, because he apparently had spoken to a Russian during the campaign at the, I think it was Republican National Convention. Now, whether he should have done that or not, you could say he erred on the side of total caution, and he's not involved. However, Rosenstein should be recused, should resign, and here's why. First of all, he was involved in signing off on the FISA warrants that are the subject of why Trump is being investigated. He also was involved in the Hillary Clinton investigation, which he then chastised Comey for. And he also is potentially a witness against Comey. And so he shouldn't be, he has far more conflicts than Sessions does. But now what's happening is Rosenstein is refusing to hand over documents to the U.S. Congress, who have asked for documents because they have oversight over him, and he refuses to give documents. Now, it's obvious why he's refusing to give documents. He doesn't want to implicate himself. So what we have here now is there is a special counsel appointed by Rosenstein who's investigating who knows what. And it's now going after Cohen, the Trump's attorney, Manafort, who did something 14 years ago in the Ukraine. And so it's starting to get to the point where it's obvious that the whole investigation, they've already uncovered, yes, the Russians, there were Russian troll farms that were trying to influence the election. I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll probably find German ones, certainly Chinese ones, and so on. But they had nothing to do with, or at least they haven't proven anything to do with the Trump campaign, and it was never alleged in the special counsel's probe. If you wanted to do this investigation, this would have been a congressional investigation, not a special counsel, because no crime has been alleged, but yet what Mueller is doing, he's trying to find crimes as part of his mandate, and he's gotten these process crimes against Flynn for lying when it looks like Strzok and Rosenstein said that he didn't lie. So there's a lot going on here, but it really starts to look like this is just how do we get Trump? And that's probably frightening to a lot of people, and has nothing to do with whether you support Trump or not, but a lot of people who are against Trump believe that this is a good thing, that you just got to take him out any way possible, not realizing that if you authorize these tactics, that you can basically go after anyone, you just get a special counsel appointed, and then you just go off to the races. Now, during the week, there was a judge, as part of the Manafort case, said, what is going on here? And before we get to that, Trump made a point. Now, people are underestimating the power of the presidency. First of all, he can't be indicted as a sitting president. This whole thing was never meant to indict Trump. It was meant to get him impeached, to draw, I think, public support against him, create this whole thing. He's a Putin puppet. And you hear people, they believe this, not because there's any evidence, just because they've been told it. Just like anything we've been told, you hear it enough, you think it's true. And if you want to believe it and it suits your politics, you're definitely going to believe it. And just like the Russian bots, anytime someone disagrees with something that someone says, they're either a bot or a Russian bot or a Trump idiot, whatever it is. But here is what Trump is saying. The questions are an intrusion into the president's Article 2 powers under the Constitution to fire any executive branch. What the president was thinking is outrageous, as the president's unfettered power to fire anybody. So that's right. Those are the Mueller questions, supposedly. I don't even know if those are real questions that were leaked. But there's no obstruction of justice for doing your job. And again, you can't indict a sitting president. This has all been designed to get him, quote, impeached. And that wasn't lost on the judge. Now, here you go. Nunes, Congress to hold AG in contempt via, this was Sarah Carter, but this was Nunes' point, that he wants to hold Sessions and Rosenstein in contempt and have Rosenstein impeached. Now, what the judge was saying in this Manafort case basically came right out and said that the Mueller team was lying, that the only reason they're interested in Manafort is they're not interested in Manafort. They're just hoping he'll sing or compose some story so they can get Trump, and that this whole thing is essentially a witch hunt. And he wants to see, the judge wants to see, the document authorizing them to expand this investigation into things that have nothing to do with the election or even obstruction of justice. What this has to do with Manafort, to putting the squeeze on Manafort, the judge believes, just to try to get Trump. And of course, the Mueller team refuses to hand over documents that show why they should be looking into this, and they're claiming it's national security, there's an ongoing investigation, and basically the judge said BS. So we'll see where that goes. But I've been looking at this myself objectively. I've been trying to see where the evidence is that somehow Trump and Russia were working together to change the course of the election. I haven't seen it. I've just heard it repeated 1,000 times. But what I have seen is things that look very odd when you consider the behavior of Rosenstein, the behavior of Mueller, the behavior of Mueller, Comey, and Rosenstein. When they're not really acting, it doesn't look like in an impartial way, and it doesn't even look like they're following proper protocol. Being a former FBI director leaks something to get a special prosecutor, then Rosenstein appoints a special prosecutor, doesn't recuse himself. Mueller goes after anyone and anyone he can. This does seem to me to be well beyond your normal course and pursuit of justice. It seems to be a pursuit of Trump. All right, let's look at inflation. Common theme. Well, this is a nice looking chart here. One of the things that is obvious whenever the government's involved in the provision or subsidy of goods and services, you get the prices going higher. And look at that. Childcare, Medicare, wages, minimum wage, college tuition, college textbooks, and so on. Those become more and more expensive because they are things that are subsidized. Housing too. But things like new car, household furnishing, clothing, cell phone service, software, and toys, they go down. Why? There's no government intervention in those products. But yet the ECB is still worrying that the inflation is slowing down and there's horrors because of that. Not enough inflation. Unbelievable how these central planners think that inflation is the cure, not a symptom of a sick economy. And they want more of it. North Korea releases U.S. detainees. That's a good sign. We'll see how that goes. And North Korea's Kim tells Chinese committed to complete denuclearization of the peninsula. Now, more on the gold-backed yuan, the petro-yuan. Well, we mentioned this, that the U.S. is already the world's largest oil exporter. We're not going to cover that again, but let's look at some of the stuff out of China. Very interesting news. A lot of people have lost sight of the fact that China could be going down the road of Japan in the 1980s. Japan was going to take over the world. Everybody was talking about Shogun. I don't know what they were talking about. There were all kinds of books, but somehow there was some secret Japanese secret as to why they're going to take over the world. Well, today the new secret is Sun Tzu, art of war. That's why China's going to win. They like gold, all this other nonsense. China's got a demographic problem. Not enough babies, and maybe not enough gold. We cover China each week. China is basically run on debt. And for the same people who complain that the U.S. is run on debt and cheer on China, they're missing the point. China is a debt-driven monster. But they're productive. Chinese factories employ brain scanners to stop workers' mistakes before they happen. You can't have any interference with that productivity, so they got the brain scanners going just to make sure the Chinese worker continues to work. This one I like a lot. This one here is, there was a survey. Let's get to this. There it is. What percentage of your country people believe the country's heading in the right direction? Oh, look at that. China is 94%. Saudi Arabia is 67%. I guess if you gave a bad answer, you'd be in trouble in Saudi Arabia. But in China, you'd have your social credit score down. 94% think the country's heading in the right direction. And I say 6% of those Chinese respondents just got a negative social credit score. And there is Karl Marx. China is a big fan of Karl Marx. Now, this one, John Kerry talking, this was in the Boston Globe. John Kerry talking with international leaders about preserving the Iran nuclear deal. I don't know anything about the deal. Trump says the worst deal ever. Okay, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I know they gave him money. I don't know what's involved. That's not the point. The point is John Kerry is not an elected official. He's not a government appointee. What is he doing? Why is he allowed to, quietly seeking to salvage Iran deal he helped craft? This is what I'm getting at when I see Mueller, Comey, Rosenstein, and in the interviews with Comey, he makes it, and Rosenstein's too, they make it sound like they're protecting something from Congress, from the president. And here, Kerry seems to be protecting this deal from the new administration. That's how the U.S. is set up. Democratic Republic, the elected officials, they're in charge, not unelected officials, and not officials who are no longer in office. But these guys seem to think that they've set something up and it's in the national interest to protect it, and that the current people in power, the Senate, the Congress, the president, they don't know what they're doing, and they've either got to be removed or they've got to be undermined. That's why they call it the deep state. Venezuela stops paying $1 billion debt to Canadian gold miner. Well, that's one way of them saving some money. And Venezuela, remember they had the Petro, which is some type of gold-backed, oil-backed cryptocurrency issued. Supposedly it's illegal in, well, not illegal, but the Congress of Venezuela says it's unauthorized. But Maduro says, no, we're going to issue it. And we'll even give you a discount to India if they use it, 30% discount. I don't know if they're going to do or not. Now, Turkey. Turkey's now the latest gold bug favorite because they're buying gold. And they're part of central banks buying gold because they know it's coming. They're smart. No, Turkey's buying gold because their currency has collapsed. And the other, quote, central banks that are buying gold hand over fist are Russia and Kazakhstan. Mostly Russia, and mostly all of that gold that they are buying is their own domestic supply. It's nothing to do with knowing what's coming. All three countries, Turkey, Russia, Kazakhstan, have relatively weak currencies, and it makes total sense for them to convert their local currencies into gold. Here's Turkish lira versus gold. It's basically doubled in the last couple of years here. You can see. So why not buy gold? But the people are always out there saying that central banks are buying gold hand over fist. They're not. The United States is not buying. Germany has actually been a net seller the last 10 years. France isn't buying. Italy isn't buying. ECB isn't buying. India isn't buying. England isn't buying. In fact, in the United Kingdom, sold a good portion, about half of its gold in 2000. Swiss National Bank sold 60% of its gold in 2000. Neither of those two banks have bought any gold. Not the Netherlands, not India, not Austria, not Spain, not Portugal. None of these countries are buying gold. But yet you hear central banks are buying gold. Yeah. Kazakhstan, Russia, and Turkey. In fact, Canada sold all of its gold and has no gold. So there's this pump out there that central banks are buying gold. They're not. Yes, okay. Over 5 years, they bought $100 billion worth of gold. You realize $100 billion in 5 years is $20 billion a year? I think 3 days of QE. It's nothing. Just trying to put it into perspective for you. Okay, crypto casino. Now, the crypto casino came back to life this week. We saw big rises in, although they fell off yesterday or this morning, big rises in Bitcoin, especially in Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, Litecoin, not so much Bitcoin, but all still 6, 7, 8, 12, 15, 18% increases. And it's only because you see Billionaire Theo unveils broker-dealer venture for major crypto traders. Coinbase prepares for monster increase in trading. We're going to see in a second Goldman Sachs, NASDAQ, all entering into the crypto space. Here's one. If you didn't get a chance to vote, you can let me know in the comments below. Between now and year end, what will rise the most? And we see gold as the odd man out. It seems people think silver will be the #1 mover this year. Bitcoin, the Litecoin, the Bitcoin, and then gold. I happen to think the cryptos will outperform, and I actually think gold will outperform silver. So I'm in the minority in that one. Now, the downward trend for cryptos has been broken. Another poll, 55% say higher highs are coming, and 45% say that this is a sucker's rally. And I got more Litecoin news. You can just click to do that on the website. You can check out the payment systems they're working on. One of the things about Litecoin they're saying is that Charlie Lee may back away from this whole project. And they think that's a positive because you don't want to have one guy in charge. The whole idea of these cryptocurrencies is they're decentralized. But of course, when they're decentralized, you have these developer battles. So it's all very new. I don't really have an opinion on it. We'll just see what happens. Hash rates, though, on Litecoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, not so much, but Ethereum all up. Reddit's planning on reinstituting Bitcoin payments, Litecoin added, and Ethereum. Let's see here. NASDAQ may launch Bitcoin trading in October. That would be a big deal. Here's the thing on Bitcoin. Hash rate improving. Here's a guy, serial tech entrepreneur, puts his $8 million home up for sale on Bitcoin. So we're seeing somewhat of adoption, increase in hash rate, and clearly a lot more interest on the institutional investment side coming up. 33% price increase last month in April for Bitcoin. Now let's talk about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, as every now and then comes out, everyone knows this, and he trashes gold, and he says it's just it makes no sense. You dig it out of the ground, and then you bury it again to hide it, and it makes no sense to him. It's a non-productive asset. And basically he's saying the same thing now about Bitcoin. He said it's probably rat-squared poison. And then his buddy, Munger, I think Warren Buffett's 87. I think Munger's probably 90. his buddy is saying, Munger is saying that Bitcoin is a turd. Now, why do these two gentlemen hate Bitcoin? Well, you could say it's because they're older. No, that's not the reason. Because they hate gold too. And gold, I actually think, the older crowd likes gold. They see it as something from their youth, from their midlife, from their old age, as being something that is consistent as a store of value. But Buffett and Munger don't see that. Munger has said, even if gold goes higher, you're still a jerk if you buy it. Buffett has always trashed gold. And the reason for it is they believe that real advancements in value come from human activity. I can understand that. A company can get better through proper management, through superior business acumen, through making a better product, and they can increase the value of their company. Same with a government, supposedly. If a government is properly managing its finances, it can have a stronger currency, especially if it backs its currency, and so on. But where Buffett and Munger give no leeway for is, while companies can improve and countries can be managed properly, they can also be mismanaged. What gold and Bitcoin are, they can't really be improved upon. They just are. Well, especially gold. Gold is immutable at certain properties, and that's it. Once you dig it out of the ground, once you refine it, it is a lump. But that's it. That's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to produce a dividend. It's not supposed to increase in size or quantity or quality. It is a 999 lump of gold, and that's it. But there's value in that. It doesn't change. No one can mess it up. It can get stolen, but no one can mess up that gold. Bitcoin, you might be able to mess up. That's a little different. That's why I never call Bitcoin digital gold, because Bitcoin relies on a lot of inputs. It relies on there being an internet. It relies on you being able to access it. It relies on no hacking, whereas gold is basically immutable. However, the reason that Buffett and Munger hate Bitcoin, it's the same reason. It doesn't do anything. It's a turd, basically. But they're not realizing that gold isn't a turd, and nor is Bitcoin. They are both, I would say, constant assets at which they should act, especially gold, as a insurance policy against either human inaction or human malfeasance. And clearly with governments, when they deflate their currencies, that should make gold more valuable versus a currency which is debased. And similarly with Bitcoin trying to be digital gold, it's trying to achieve the same purposes. The other reason I think that Munger and especially Buffett now are not big fans of gold and Bitcoin and huge fans of stocks are, not only can they rely on the company doing the right thing and improving Coca-Cola or Apple, whatever business it is, and doing better, because they're so big now, they can also count on the government to help them out if their companies don't do well. So if you remember, Buffett bought in, I think it was August of 2008, he bought Goldman Sachs stock, which basically cratered and would have taken down Buffett with him. But the United States bailed out. He bought that kind of with the assurance that if anything happened to Goldman Sachs, government would come in and bail them out. And they did just that. Now, in this letter here, people forget this letter. This is Warren Buffett's become a crony capitalist, because he's not just relying on his investments and the companies doing the right thing. He's relying that if they don't do the right thing, the government is going to help him out. And it's exactly what they did in 2008. And in 2009, Warren Buffett wrote, 2010 he waited, this fawning, sycophantic letter to the U.S. government, basically thanking Uncle Sam for bailing us out. Now, he didn't say bailing me out. He was basically saying that, the world was in a mess and was dependent on commercial paper, and that the government stepped in and fixed things. Yeah, fixed things, fixed his portfolio. Meanwhile, Ethereum looks like they're going to get their own investment trust. There's already a Bitcoin trust. St. Louis Fed, the St. Louis Fed is worth reading. They don't just toe the central bank line. They write some relatively interesting articles, speculation, so on. And basically say Bitcoin's like a regular currency, i.e. no intrinsic value. But it's interesting for them to admit that their own currency has no intrinsic value as well. There's a story on Goldman. They had crypto contracts without trading, meaning they're going to do derivatives. But Goldman Sachs basically says Bitcoin is not a fraud. Now that's a distinction from JP Morgan so far, who has said, or at least Jamie Dimon, the CEO president of JP Morgan, says that Bitcoin is a fraud. All this talk of Goldman Sachs, NASDAQ has driven crypto prices higher during the week. We'll see if that is a sucker's rally or something going to go forward. Speaking of Goldman Sachs, no big deal. Pay another $110 million to resolve Forex probes. SEC cautiously opened to initial coin offerings. Well, you can see how they are. They can get fees. Their banker and Silicon Valley cohorts can also bring those to market and make a lot of money. Now, Japan's financial regulators pushing for crypto exchanges to drop certain cryptocurrencies like Monero, and I think a couple others that have this secrecy code in it, and therefore they might be good for money laundering. So the regulators are looking into trying to make the exchanges not carry those coins. The problem with that is that's going to drive those currencies into off-chain, off-exchange swaps. So we'll see how that works out. For those of you interested, back in March 2014, I wrote an article, Bitcoin Regulation, Here It Comes, and I talked about precisely how the SEC might start to look at cryptocurrencies, including maybe deeming them to be securities. Not going to go into that, but I pretty much, back in 2014, hit all the issues that they're now talking about 4 years later over at the SEC. I think that about does it here. Gold, well, Kazakhstan we mentioned, draws even with the United Kingdom. This billionaire put half his net worth into gold. That was an interesting story. Indian gold imports dipped in March. There's an interesting story on the Smaulgld Museum to explore Curse of Civil War gold. There's your royal purchases, however. They're thinking it's going to increase gold demand through the end of the year. So you never know with Indian gold. It's always strong, but you just don't know how strong it is. There's Turkey buying gold because booming inflation and sinking currency, as we mentioned at the top of, well, it wasn't the hour, but the top of this broadcast. Yeah. All this stuff about people, central banks buying gold because they know it's coming. It's all nonsense. Shanghai Gold Exchange, this is through March. They rose 64%. I just got the April numbers. They're even better. This is the second biggest year at the Shanghai Gold Exchange. We'll have that out, I hope, later in the week, the numbers there. For those of you who follow Wealth Watchman and SRS Rocco, I'll be having both of those gentlemen on individually, I think Tuesday and Wednesday, to talk about Wealth Watchman's going to talk about Indian silver, and SRS Rocco, I think, is just going to talk about silver. Probably bring up, I think he wants to talk about oil and energy, so that should be interesting. Bitcoin pumper, women, yeah, they're going to drive Bitcoin skyrocketing. Here you go, 10,000. Tim Draper, $250,000 Bitcoin. Bitcoin can replace cash. See, the Bitcoin people are equally pumped. The only difference is they actually write some of the time. But they still doesn't stop them from pump. I have 3 things that could lift Bitcoin to new high. Ethereum going to go to 15,000. Yeah. Well, what do you think the next gold and silver pump is going to be? Is it going to be gold, silver shortage, COMEX default, Turkish, Russian central bank buying, or something new? Well, we'll see. I think there'll be some. I think it's some variant of central bank buying. That's the new one. They're buying hand over fist. Game changer. Don't be afraid of the Fed. You know, there's always a silver shortage pump. You know, that one's coming. The coming silver crunch is worse than you know. Yeah, it doesn't exist. Now this poor, we'll end with this, I think. This guy finds I don't know, he finds $400,000 worth of gold in a garbage can, but he did. And they said he could keep a reward of it, and now they're saying, nope, that's your job. You don't get to keep anything. Thanks for turning it in. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, there he is. You may not be able to keep the gold. So that about does it. Well, thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you during the week. If you want to buy gold or silver, please consider doing so through the Smaulgld site at Golden Eagle Coin, SD Bullion, Money Metals Exchange. Smaulgld does get a small commission, not investment advice to buy gold or silver, but that is one way you can help out the site, or you can buy these coins here from the Royal Mint These are gold and silver bullion coins at good prices. And also, you can become a Smaulgld patron or donate via PayPal, Bitcoin, or Litecoin. Thank you very much.